All right, Clayton, we started off the week as we do every Monday by chatting with Michigan head football coach Jim Harbaugh. We also spoke with Zach Zinter and Braden McGregor. And, I'll be honest, we're kind of getting to this point in the year now where it feels like, I don't know that, I don't, it's starting to feel like we're in the battle rhythm of the season. In terms of the Monday press conferences, in terms of the players, all of the firsts are kind of knocked off. You've played your non-conference schedule. You've played your Big Ten opener. You've played your road opener. So now it's business as usual. A game against Minnesota coming up on Saturday night, where I believe the last time I checked the Vegas line, they're a 17-point favorite. Night game, 7:30 on NBC. What were your biggest or the biggest takeaway from Jim Harbaugh's Monday presser? Because it was kind of business as usual for him.
Yeah, I mean, he was talking, nothing out of the ordinary, just Sir Isaac Newton, the laws of physics. He was talking about the Earth's tremendous, in quote, that's his exact quote, gravitational pull. And basically talking about how he thinks this program right now is in a scary good place, that the law of averages will eventually catch up to them, but it's their job to be like smoke instead of, falling like everything does with the Earth's gravitational pull. Smoke rises, heat rises. He believes that energy rises. So that's their task right now. And it kind of feels true. I know he puts it in interesting terms, but I mean, you look at the way things are going, 5-0 start. The schedule looks extremely manageable until you get to Happy Valley on November 11th. And you have kind of a 3-game start to what I would call a playoff run at Penn State, at Maryland, Ohio State at home, potentially Big Ten championship playoff in the rest of the way. So right now it's kind of their goal to just keep things as good as they are. He also had some comments on the offensive line. He said he really liked the way the left side played with Ladarius Henderson and Trevor Keegan in there. But he also said that, hey, maybe we'll have a rally group like we do with defense, where a couple guys are all, the guys on there start the drive, and then they have a rally group that comes in for 3-4 plays in the middle to kind of give them a blow. That would certainly be interesting. I don't know that I'd bet on that happening, but it's a kind of, Jim Harbaugh's way of saying he has trust in a lot of those different guys on the offensive line. We saw a lot of guys play well on the offensive line on Saturday, including the backups. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with that rotation, especially factoring in that Miles Hinton at right tackle is playing banged up and missed the game. Seems like with an injury. You would have thought he at least would have been in there with the backups if he was, healthy at any point. So that will be interesting to watch. But, just him talking about the depth, too, of this team, I thought it was something I noticed on Saturday the most, is just the amount of guys that they could put in. There was no drop-off. I mean, there was no drop-off on the D-line without Mason Graham in there against what is a pretty good and unique Nebraska rush offense. And then, I mean, just the camaraderie, the way guys were celebrating with each other. Jason Avant mentioned it on the radio broadcast during the game, but Peyton O'Leary scores his touchdown, and he had about 15 handshakes personalized and practiced with different guys when he came to the sideline. Junior Colson was mobbing Kenneth Grant after his interception to the point that guys couldn't get up off the pile. These guys are just happy for each other and the camaraderie on this team. So it's scary good, I think, as Jim Harbaugh said. And it seems like right now with the schedule, things are going to keep rolling here going forward.
Yeah, I texted this to Clayton earlier, just kind of making the comment like, kind of a standard boring Monday press conference. And he brought up the comment about Jim Harbaugh and gravitational pull. And I said, it just kind of triggered this thing in my brain where I thought I was back in like high school science, and I just kind of dozed off from there. So
he talked more about
me.
His answer about me. His answer was 5 minutes. I mean, that was, it's hard to get him to talk for 5 minutes on something.
Yeah. And it's so funny when he goes off on tangents like that too, because it'll be like, hey, Jim, what do you think of, it was a little warmer than usual in Nebraska this weekend. And he'll just, by the end of it, he'll talk about how, he pulled through McDonald's this weekend and they were out of French fries. And, it's something to be said about a good French fry. And it's just always some kind of tangent like that. And our buddy, Account 22, actually said, corrected me. Michigan is a 20.5-point favorite against Minnesota. I think it opened around 17 or something like that. But other things of note from the Monday presser, I thought it was interesting. Obviously, I think I forget who the reporter was. It might've been Angelique that asked, but trying to get him to say that offensive line that we saw Saturday would be that starting offensive line moving forward. I think that's where a tangent started. I don't recall, but yeah, that left side of the line, I thought the line in general played its best, most cohesive game of the year. I know that pass protection at times was a bit of an adventure, especially a guy like Ladarius Henderson, who I think graded out somewhere in the high 30s on Pro Football Focus. But I think that's kind of, we talked about JJ McCarthy's being an outlier, the interceptions being an outlier from a couple of weeks ago. I think he's pretty good in pass pro. That's not a huge concern to me. Interesting that they say they want to get Trente Jones back in there. I can't remember if this is the first time this has come up, but the TTG periods that they have in practice. Clayton, do you want to kind of address what that is?
Yeah, so they have mentioned it over the years a couple times, kind of in passing, but I mean, he was asked about the no penalties, and they had no penalties in this game. I was going back and looking at the last time that had happened. It has not happened in over 15 years. And then I'm listening to In the Trenches, their post-game show, and Jim Harbaugh said he was informed that it's the first time Michigan has had a game with no penalties committed since 1980. I mean, that's before Jim Harbaugh was a player. Jim Harbaugh was likely at Ann Arbor Pioneer at that point, or in 8th grade or something like that, doing the math on the fly. So, or probably freshman or sophomore in high school. Either way, that's a long time ago. So the discipline on this team, and he attributed some of that to the TTG, Teach the Game sessions that Grant Newsome apparently has taken over this year, where they're going over situational football. I think Zach Zinner said that one of an example of something they would go over is Patrick Mahomes last night, going down and at the goal line instead of scoring, to make sure that they just kind of run the clock out there. And that some of the stuff are dumb plays by guys in either the NFL or college where it's like, hey, don't be this guy, that sort of thing. So, man, they just seem to be covering every single base lately with this staff and just the leadership on this team, and then the way the players retain all the information and want to learn about it. And Jim Harbaugh said they're all stimulated during those meetings and really taking in that info. So I'm guessing some other teams around the country do stuff like this, but it just feels like Michigan is doing things like this, the minor details, better than just about anybody, and they're getting their players to buy into that, which is maybe even more important.
Well, that's a great foundation to set too, because at some point you are going to, again, we talked about this. It will continue to be a storyline. This schedule doesn't really have, if there are bowl caliber opponents on there, they're on the fringes of it until they get to that stretch of games in November. And I think that those games that's when it's even more important to impose your will and focus on those details, because, I think of, at some point, if you're going to get to the playoff, you're probably, you'll play a team like a Georgia or a Texas, or, teams that have not only comparable talent, but maybe even slightly more talented than you when you look at guys, certainly on the recruiting trail. So setting that foundation now, and again, it goes back to, the way they stack their shoes in the weight room. It goes to, the way everything is competitive there. I think that Harbaugh's biggest asset, I think, is his ability to turn everything into a competition or striving for perfection. And, I know the narrative with this team has been, they're blowing teams out, but what does that mean? Like, they haven't played anyone. Well, there are a couple ways you could look at it, especially when you look at these last 2 weeks, because the non-conference being what it was, again, I don't think there's ever anything to learn from those games when you're playing that level of opponent, unless it looks bad, right? So you get into Big Ten play, and we'll see what the context winds up looking like with the Rutgers game and the Nebraska game. If a team like Rutgers continues to play good, that's going to look more impressive. If a team like Nebraska gets better late in the year, that will be a win that looks impressive. But even if those teams aren't as good, or if Nebraska kind of stays at this level that they're at, you're still butchering these teams and doing exactly what you should do against opponents that you completely outclass. And to me right now, I think that's, and we'll talk about how to contextualize that with the rest of college football here in a minute. But to me, that's the biggest takeaway so far, is that, you see teams like Florida State is kind of danced with fire in the last couple of weeks. And Georgia certainly has danced with fire the last few weeks. To me, there's something to be said about just bludgeoning the team that's across from you. And through 5 weeks, that's what we've seen from Michigan so far.
Yeah, 100%. Because you do have to look around the country and see what other teams are doing, and a lot of them are struggling. I mean, Auburn's not supposed to be that good. I mean, I'm sure they're better than Nebraska or Rutgers, but Georgia's in there in a dogfight, as you said. So, and it's not the only example. LSU goes down. Maybe that makes Florida State's win over LSU look, maybe at least a little bit less impressive. You could go on and on and on about what's occurred already in the college football season. But you're right. I mean, we'll be tracking, and really it could come into play too. Michigan's crossover opponents, when you think about Nebraska, their record, that could come into play when we're talking about a potential 3-way tiebreaker in the Big Ten East, which I don't love Michigan's chances there, given the 2 crossover opponents in Minnesota losing to Northwestern already. But regardless, you're going to watch these teams. I think, what Michigan has done against these teams is exactly what you said. They've done what they're supposed to do, and especially defensively have just been suffocating. I know, and I thought the offense took a big step forward. We talked about the offensive line, but J.J. McCarthy was really good. I thought the run game as a whole, and Kalel Mullings get involved there, was really good, and the wide receiver depth looked a little bit better. Seems like they're able to expand that a little bit more as they go forward. But the Michigan defense was stellar again, because when you look at the offense, they're going against – there was no Luke Reimer in there. There was no Cam Lenhart, one of their best defensive ends for Nebraska, and then that Singleton went down in one of the first few plays. But it was still a good performance. But the Michigan defense was going up. That was what Nebraska had. I know they're on their second quarterback, who may end up being the guy going forward, but they took him out of their game. I mean, they stopped running the option after early on in that game because they just couldn't do it against the athletes that Michigan has. So right now it's A+ for the defense. Offense took a big step forward, and we're not going to learn a ton given the competition going forward. I think in terms of how are they going to respond in some of those bigger moments, but how it looks overall, I mean, it looks pretty damn good. And you keep steamrolling these teams, then I think Michigan will feel good once those bigger games come.